Rita, I have a question.
Did someone have a question?
I did. That's Rita. I had a question. Can you remind me of the process for asking a question?
Just
Remotely?
say, Mr. Mayor, I have a comment or a question, and he'll recognize you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? And everyone should mute their phones so that we don't get background. So thank you.
What'd that mean? All five are on? Okay, thank you. So we'll call this evening's meeting of the City Council to order, and we'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Yes. Mayor Ardis,
Here?
Councilman Member Ali,
Here.
Member Sear, Councilmember Grab,
Here.
Councilmember Jensen,
Here.
Councilmember Kelly,
Here.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Here.
Councilmember Euler,
Here.
Councilmember Riggenbach, and Councilmember Ruckriegel. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll probably just do a couple housekeeping things in terms of just letting everybody know how we're going to try to communicate as well. But we'll just start out with a moment of silent prayer or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So for both the council members who were gracious enough to stay at home and participate electronically, and also for the listening public, we'll try to do this as seamlessly as possible as we can tonight, but it's obviously a new situation. So, and this is especially for the council members, just so you don't have to try to jump over each other to speak to an issue. What I'll try to do is I will literally ask each member before a vote if they have any questions or comments. In that way, we don't have to try to. I'll be able to see the members that are in the chambers here, but for those on the phone, don't worry about trying to get through. I'll just go alphabetically as we're listed on the clerk's roll call, and ask everybody if there's any questions or if they have anything on a particular item before we go forward. And we'll just take our time. In terms of voting, since we do have people on the phone, we'll have to do a verbal roll call on the votes that we take tonight. I do need to read the announcement in terms of electronic attendance. In accordance with Governor Pritzker's Executive Order 2020-07, issued on March 16, 2020, prohibiting the gathering of 50 people or more in a single room or single space at the same time, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommending gatherings of no more than 10 people in a single room or single space and social distancing of at least 6 feet between persons. Mayor Ardis declared a local state of emergency on March 19th, 2020, and has closed City Hall to the public to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. To comply with these recommendations and requirements, the city is complying with the spirit of the Open Meetings Act by permitting 5 city council members and the mayor to attend the regular city council meeting on March 24th, 2020 in person, while the remaining 5 city council members will attend via the phone. Those city council members attending the meeting via phone shall be declared present. Okay. With that said, Councilman Ruckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the minutes of the City Council meeting held on March 10th, 2020 as printed.
Motion to approve, seconded by Councilman Regenbach. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, do you want to do electronic or you just want to do a verbal roll call on everyone? Let's just do a verbal roll call on everyone. Aye.
Okay. Oh, Councilmember Ali,
Aye.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Grayeb,
Aye.
Councilmember Jensen,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Aye.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach, Councilmember Ruckriegel. Passes unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
We are at the consent agenda. 20-066 is a communication from the city manager and the community development director with a request for the following. A is to approve the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan for submittal to the Department of Housing and Urban Development with a total 2020 grant allocation of $2,678,077, and B is a request to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2020 to 2021 biennial budget relating to the CDBG fund and capital fund to reallocate CDBG program income to the capital fund in the amount of $5,052 and to adjust the CDBG fund and home fund revenues and expenditures to reflect the 2020 federal grant award. And of course, we need 2 separate votes for those 2 items. Thank you.
Were we going to do the second item on consent?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Guess I needed to turn the page. 20-067 is a request to concur with the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance approving a special use in a Class R7 multifamily residential district for a non-conforming use change for a residence, office, and music studio for property at 7150 North University Street.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So, Council, I'll ask if there's any members present that would like to remove an item, and then if there's anything that hasn't been removed, I'll go through the list on council members that are attending electronically. Any items by the council members here to remove from consent? I'm seeing none. So, Councilmember Ali.
I would like to removed to be able to speak to 20-066.
Okay, 20066. Councilmember Graham,
Nothing to remove.
thank you. Councilmember Jensen,
No.
Councilmember Kelly,
Nothing to remove.
Councilmember Moore.
Nothing to remove, but I will have a comment on 066 as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So we would have a motion to approve 067 by Councilmember Sear and seconded by Councilmember Riggenbach.
Mayor Ardis,
Yes.
Councilmember Ali,
Aye.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Graham,
Aye.
Councilmember Jensen,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Aye.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach, and Councilmember Ruckriegel. Passes unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we're on 20-066. Councilmember Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make a comment in reference to the consolidated plan for submittal to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the grant application, and I just want to express my appreciation for the efforts of the staff, the city staff and community development, who really reached out to the entire community in terms of gathering citizen input. I mean, they worked tirelessly in terms of making sure that the citizens were involved and gave, substantial input into the plan. And I just want to say thank you for allowing such broad input, and those efforts are greatly appreciated. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Did you want to put a motion on the floor before we go through the rest of the council?
I would like to move to approve 20-066, please.
Okay. We have a motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Sear. This is on item A. I'm going to go through the council to see if anybody else would like to speak to this. Councilmember Sear? Okay. Councilmember Graham?
I'm good.
Councilmember Jensen?
I have some questions.
Okay.
And first, I'd like to start by I also want to commend the staff for such strong, robust outreach and all the community input that was given. I attended one of the meetings and completed a survey myself, and it was very good, and I appreciate that as well. I do have a couple questions. I don't know if Director Black is available or if it should go to someone else.
Director Black is here.
Okay. My first question is about Part B of the action item. It wasn't clear to me what the purpose is for moving the $5,052 from the CDBG program income to the capital fund.
Okay.
So if you could explain that, I'd appreciate it.
So we're on item A. And I think,
Okay.
I think
Then I have some questions related to that.
Okay.
My question, I guess, is by adopting this 2020-2024 plan, it wasn't clear to me what each year, I think there's supposed to be an action plan and what that will be for each year. I didn't see that in the materials. And what our priorities are. I didn't see them listed. It appears to me from reading it that we're saying by adopting this plan that our priorities are affordable housing and home repair and things related to that nature for these three programs. Is that correct?
Councilwoman, that is generally correct. Based on the feedback from the community, the top priority is housing. both in terms of the renovation and rehabilitation of existing housing, the creation of new affordable housing, so housing stabilization and affordability, public service funding, which is part of the CDBG dollars, as you know, was a high priority, and then economic development, either in job development or small business development, was another one of the priorities. In terms of the consolidated plan, you are correct. It's a multi-year plan. Every year we have to submit an annual plan. So the annual plan for the first year of the consolidated plan is effectively the same as the consolidated plan. And then this time next year, we would bring you an annual plan for the 2021 allocation.
Okay. Thank you. As a follow-up then, by adopting this plan, are we saying then that the other areas for which the council has adopted as priorities in the past for some of this funding, including CDBG funding like domestic violence, elder abuse, sexual assault, that they're no longer part of our top priorities that will receive CDBG funding or applications for grants for those areas?
No, Councilwoman. All of the items that you mentioned are part of the public service set aside of our CDBG funds by the regulations, by the federal regulations. We can't exceed more than 15% of our total CDBG allocation for public services. So there's absolutely no change there whatsoever.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure of that. And thank you and your staff again for all the outreach, for allowing us to get so much community input. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Kelly,
Yes?
did you have any? I'm just going through to see if you had any comments or questions on this.
No comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, too, would like to thank the community development staff. I'm not sure if Director Black realizes the gems that he has in that department, because they exceeded all expectations in that I was able to attend 2 of the 3 community meetings, a number of meetings in City Hall with a number of staff members. I won't start mentioning their names because I'm sure to forget someone, and they know who they are because we met a number of occasions about the upcoming community meetings, the graphics that needed to be displayed, the materials that needed to be offered. They just did a wonderful job, and if this is the way they do this process every year, I think we're always going to get a good result. If I could refer to Councilwoman Jensen to pages 122 and 123, it lists the combined goals for the 5 years and what the expected outcomes are. So that may address part of your question. And then on page 132, it does indicate that through the Human Resources Commission, which we have decided to rename, those funds that the director indicated could be allocated for public use, I allocated it from that commission. So just to thank your team, Director Black, they did a wonderful job, and I'm sure that as we move forward, we would address some of the issues that were revealed in the plan. What particularly came out to me was the 60% of housing need that was indicated for the South Side. And so I won't go into details about it here, but we will be meeting virtually in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody with any follow-up on that round? So we have a motion on item A from Councilmember Ali and seconded by Councilmember Sear. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Mayor Artis,
Yes.
Councilmember Ali,
Aye.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Grayeb,
Aye.
Councilmember Jensen,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Yes.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach, Councilmember Ruckriegel. Passes unanimous.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. On item B, since Councilwoman Ali pulled the item, I'll ask her first if she has any discussion on this item.
No discussion, Mayor.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion on this item before we see if there's other council members that do?
I would like to move to approve item B on 20-066.
Okay, motion to approved and seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Any council members in chambers have any discussion points on this? Seeing none. Councilmember Graham?
No, I'm good. Voting yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Jensen?
I do have one question related to the purpose of the reallocation of the CDBG program income to the capital fund.
Councilwoman, so CDBG program income, just to provide some context, is any income that the city generates off of CDBG dollars that have been used for programs in the community. So the most
Okay.
simple example would be if we loaned CDBG dollars to a property owner or a business owner and they repaid that loan, that would be considered program income. HUD allows, the federal regulations allow that if we have program income less than $25,000 in an annual year, in a given year, then we can convert that into non-CDBG dollars. So basically, we have a capital project that is set up where we can sweep these CDBG program income dollars. By the federal regs, they still have to be used for neighborhood stabilization or community improvement projects, but they don't have all of the additional federal regulations that exist with CDBG dollars. So it allows us to have a little bit more flexibility in the use.
Okay, thank you very much. That makes a lot of sense, and that's a good use of that income. So thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Kelly?
Nothing to add, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Mayor Artis,
Yes?
Councilmember Ali,
Aye.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Grayab,
Aye.
Member Jensen,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Yes.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach, and Councilmember Ruckriegel. It passes unanimously. We're at regular business. 20-068 is a communication from the city manager and the Corporation Council with a request to approve an agreement between Red Carpet Properties and the city of Peoria.
Councilmember Riggenbach?
Move for the approval as presented.
Motion to approved and seconded by Councilmember Sear. Anybody in chambers have any discussion on this? Okay, I'm seeing none. Councilmember Ali?
I just would like to comment that Red Carpet Car Wash has been a great Peoria business for many, many years. They've provided a wonderful service to our community. They have an outstanding workforce. They maintain a beautiful facilities, and they have beautiful landscapes. I think it's an unfortunate circumstance, but I thank them for working out an agreement with the city, and I look forward to the business getting back up and going again at that second location. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Graham?
I totally agree with Councilwoman Ali,
Thank you.
and I will be supporting this.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jensen?
I don't have any comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a problem with this, with the sanitary sewer running underneath those same properties, and whether or not we might find ourselves in the same predicament at a later time. I spoke with the manager about this, with the city manager, and he followed up with the sanitary district. And Mr. Manager, I wonder if you could share with us what the sanitary district had to say.
Yes. Thank you, Councilman. We did reach out to the sanitary district. They said that that sewer line is in good shape, but they did put it on their list to be lined. Once lined, they think that'll extend the useful life of that sanitary sewer by 50 years. So they're very confident that it's in good shape.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore?
No comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no additional comments in chambers, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, you can call the roll, please.
Mayor Artis,
Aye.
Councilmember Ali,
Aye.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Grayeb,
Aye.
Councilmember Jensen,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Yes.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach, and Councilmember Ruckriegel. Passes unanimously. Item 20-069 is a communication from the City Manager and Corporation Council with a request to adopt an ordinance amending the emergency power of the mayor. There is a replacement ordinance on your desk, and it changes nothing. It only corrects 2 typos. So it's the same one that went out in your packet.
I'm going to call on the Corporation Council for a overview of this item. Is that yellow?
Can you hear me now? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The ordinance that is before the council tonight is a clarification of the mayor's emergency power, or of the mayor's authority when an emergency has been declared. Legal staff has reviewed the Illinois Municipal Code, the Illinois Emergency Management Act, and what is in the city's existing code in section 7-35.2 and 7-35.3. The city has been operating under a declared state of emergency since the 18th of March. That declaration of emergency is set to expire today. I want to point out a few key features of this ordinance. One, under the Illinois Emergency Management Act, it states that emergencies declared by the mayor are only to last for 7 days unless extended by an ordinance. We are recommending to extend that to be a period that will coincide with the next regularly or specially scheduled city council meeting. That is consistent with what is in the Illinois Municipal Code for emergencies, that authority exists until the next regularly or specially scheduled city council meeting. So instead of asking the mayor to execute a new declaration of emergency every 7 days, we would have him execute one at each and every regularly or specially scheduled city council meeting. Now, the city manager has the same authority under the Emergency Succession Act. You're not
Council Peterson, excuse me, but I just got a message from one of the council members that they're having a hard time hearing, so maybe just a little bit more direct.
I'll speak a little closer to the microphone. Is that better?
Thank you.
The 7-day time limit for the city manager's authority, we are not recommending that change. There is a thorough listing of the city manager's authority in an emergency already listed in the code. The existing code, however, did not quite spell out all of the mayor's authority. We do not think that by passing this ordinance, you are delegating, other than a change in time frame, any authority the mayor would not already have in the case of an emergency. We are simply trying to be transparent with the public about what those powers could, in an extreme case, include. Now, I did try to send out some information to you today to make sure we were clear on how many times this has been executed in the past. Since 2006, the mayor has declared an emergency on 6 occasions. Some of you may be well aware of that. Some of you may be surprised to know that we've operated under that in the past. When the mayor signed the emergency declaration, it did a couple of things. One, it, in effect, will say started the clock. So that is the point when staff and personnel and services we procure started truly tracking those things, so that as we look down the road to situations where FEMA or IEMA might have some reimbursement, there's a thorough tracking of capital and services that are spent and expended on this behalf. My only other point I want to make is by adopting this ordinance, we want the public to be very clear that this adoption does not mean that the mayor would automatically go into implementing any of those changes. We've received multiple phone calls, in particular in regards to liquor licenses, wanting to know if the mayor would have the authority to automatically ban the sale of all liquor in the city. As the local liquor commissioner, he actually already holds that power under an emergency, but it does get reiterated in this ordinance that he could do so. At this point, other than some emergency procurement and some anticipated staffing changes and some cancellation of vacations and personal time to make sure that we are adequately staffed, we have had very limited execution of his authority. Those two things in addition to public closing the building to the public, but we haven't not had to ask for any other extreme expenditures or staffing changes or emergency declaration type issues.
Council Peterson, just on that note on staffing issues, as the manager has explicit powers as well, those actions most likely would come from the manager's office.
Yes.
Anyway, Mr. Manager, I don't know if you had a comment on that or not. Okay.
You're correct. I think that when it comes to staffing, those decisions would come from the manager.
Thank you. Were you done?
Yes,
Thank you for that brief. So we'll ask, is there anyone in chambers that has questions of Council Peterson? Councilman Reckriel?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your update today. That really, really did help. And this is kind of an easy one. Just in Article 2, number F, and I know that we talked earlier, and the posting of this is kind of antiquated, but we've got the fire station, the police station, City Hall. We do have a great library system that is sort of throughout the whole city. So can we also just add the library locations in there as well for postings? I know it doesn't make a difference right now in this current situation because the libraries are closed, but not in every emergency disaster would they be closed. And so that would be a great point of information for our public.
That's an easy addition, Councilman.
Thank you. And for the listening audience, under item F, we are required to post, according to the ordinance, 3 copies of the proclamation declaring the existence of the emergency and any curfew to be posted at City Hall, the police station, and the fire station, and also online at the city's website. Councilmember Reckrigel's request was to add libraries on that list. Thank you. Anyone else in chambers that would like to discuss this? Councilmember Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question for our council. Page 3 under Article 2.7E. I just have a problem reading that paragraph. Just want to make sure, who would be the emergency successor to the mayor? And then to me, it still reads like every 30 days. If there's no meeting, then every 30 day, the mayor or successor would be entitled to just call an emergency without ever talking to the council. Am I reading this correctly? I just need some clarification there.
As to the existence of the order, it would be up to 30 days or until the adjournment of the next meeting. So it would be one or the other. Since our council tends to meet bi-monthly, it would be, in our case, at those bi-monthly meetings. If for some reason one would be canceled, it would still expire at the end of that 30-day period. And under the Interim Succession Act, the city manager would serve as the mayor's successor.
Thank you.
Anyone else in chambers on this item? Councilmember Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just have a couple questions. Kind of reading through this here. If there's any particular action taken, I didn't see anything about the council being notified about that. And right now would probably be a great time to be able to ask that question on what actions have been taken right now. You know, my biggest concern right now is the overall city budget that we are in right now and experiencing. I imagine tremendous revenue loss, and there's decisions being made. And as far as the council being part of it right now, I don't know what's happening. So that's kind of my question right now.
So as of right now, as we've stated in the communications, what we've been working towards is trying to get more of our employees to be able to work remotely, so that if the time comes where we have to shut down City Hall for some reason, that we have the ability to work remotely. So really the only unusual expense that we've incurred so far was securing enough laptops just recently and getting them prepared so that staff could work from home. We distributed about 49 laptops yesterday to employees so that when that decision is made, they'll be able to work from home and work and telecommute. That's the only outstanding expense that we've incurred so far, other than an inordinate amount of staff time that's been dedicated and devoted towards this emergency over the last couple of weeks.
And as far as that goes with the staff's time, that's not above and beyond what's already been budgeted?
It's many hours over and above but a lot of it's our salaried employees. We're just tracking our time right now in hopes that as the reimbursement, since we're under a national emergency and a state declared emergency and a locally declared emergency, that we'll be able to get a portion of those expenses reimbursed through the federal government when those dollars come through from FEMA.
I think in the past we've received reimbursements. For example, the flooding that we've had on the riverfront, we did receive some money, so that's great. I think the one part, and I don't necessarily want to be giving up my responsibilities as a city councilman, but want to be part of that decision too when something like that happens. I think emergency, and maybe there's many different definitions to the emergency portion of it. Even buying computers for the staff to work at home, that may have been something, even though it's something small, or just even notifying the council that expense is going to happen, or if there's been an enormous amount of overtime and just some discussion needs to be happening there. So, I mean, I have a little bit of concern with this, but I just listening to Corporation Counsel saying this is consistent with the Illinois Emergency
Management Act.
Management Act, so that, and I like the timeframes that we're able to communicate from meeting to meeting, but it's that in between that we're not knowing what's going on, and I think there just needs to be some something added to this when there's action being taken that the council is notified, so we know what's going on. I think it was during the flooding last time, the city manager took action to take care of the flooding, and we were notified afterwards and what those amounts were. It would have been nice to know ahead of time instead of afterwards and reading it in the newspaper. And just the particular situation that we're in right now too, how long is this going to last? This seems like this is going to be maybe a year or so before we're back to normal. And that part seems concerning, that we'll be operating under this emergency. And I guess I'm trying to stress is the importance of communicating when we are going outside our budget and having those expenditures happen. And if any other council members would like to chime in on that too, I'd just like to hear everybody else's perspective if possible. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by expressing my appreciation for the discretion that's already been used in this emergency as well as prior emergencies. My current concern is some of the language in this amendment of the ordinance and the fact that we're picking now as the time to do that in the middle of one. I think that there needs to be more time and more discussion on exactly how we want one of these situations to unfold and at what trigger point the decision is made that one is declared, what thresholds are in place for some of the items that are within an ordinance, such as the power to tax and the power to incur debt. I think that the public looks to us, especially in an emergency situation, to be at the forefront and not in the background. And when we talk about some subjects like taxing and incurring debt, those are really significant pieces of our business and the job that we do. And I think that post tonight, we need to have a lot more discussion about this and what triggering mechanism we want to use and what thresholds we have in place for how we manage these things. And I don't think that there's a possibility of addressing that at this point, but I think that if we're going to amend this ordinance, it needs to be done at a later time addressing some of those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ali.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Artis. I had a number of questions, and I had a number of citizens that contacted me with questions, and I was able to reach out to Council Peterson, and she clarified all the questions really that I had and that I had heard from other citizens, and so I appreciate that clarification. I'm interested also in our maintaining efforts and goals for woman and minority business contracting, even while we're in this emergency status for procurement. I hope that we don't sway too far away from those goals and we keep those goals in mind with regard to procurement. And I would like to hear from City Manager, I guess, as with regard to that question.
I think we certainly can keep those goals in the forefront of as we're looking at emergency procurements and as we're looking at doing things. If we're working on a public works project, we can treat that as we would normally do that and require that of any of our contractors. So I think that's very achievable.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I mean, we're in a public health crisis, so I appreciate the fact that we're trying to have our employees work remotely if they're able, because we need to protect our workforce while at the same time we're protecting and serving our citizens. So I appreciate the fact that you're moving to a remote workforce as much as possible. That's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Graham. Councilmember Graham, make sure you're not on mute.
Are you able to hear me, Mayor?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. I certainly appreciate all your efforts. I do want to, I think this was something the manager and I recently discussed. I do want all council members to know that we have procedures for virtually everything you can imagine covered in our emergency procedures book. It's about 6 inches thick. And I hope, Manager Urick, that we are going over that with the new council members as they come in, because pandemic planning was very much a part of that. Mr. Manager, could you respond on that?
You're correct, and we during the orientation we did share a lot of documentation, including the emergency plans, with our new city council members. We did recently send out the entire emergency plan to all the council members as well, and I think we can certainly revisit at a later date, as Councilman Euler suggested, kind of the procedures that we have, particularly in regards to the spending. I mean, the intent that's already in the ordinance from the policies that have been in place for 25 plus years are that if we have to spend money over and above what we've currently budgeted, I, as the city manager, have to bring that back to you as the council with a plan for how we're going to pay for that. So that has to come forward, and that's what we've done in prior emergencies, is we've done that and utilized that. For example, with the flooding expenses, we've brought that back to you to say, here's what we need you to approve. So, and we'll continue to do so as we go forward.
Manager Urick, I appreciate that explanation, and also I appreciate the many updates that you've given us as this crisis has unfolded. I think none of us would have imagined that we'd end up being on the city council during a pandemic, yet we do exercise this all the time, periodically, to cover some of these possibilities. And I appreciate all the work that's being done, and I appreciate what we're doing tonight to clarify the emergency power of the mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in support of this. I think it's important, and I'm glad that Corporation Counsel Peterson noted that this ordinance simply codifies the authority that the mayor already has under the Illinois Emergency Management Act. And I think I commend her and the city manager for bringing this forward to us so that we can be transparent with the public about what those emergency powers are. One question that I have for Corporation Counsel Peterson, under Section D, where we have, I think, 7 items are listed, specific orders that are authorized and actions that the mayor can take under this ordinance. Are these the only orders and acts that are authorized under the act, or are there additional ones? And if so, I'm just curious why these 7 were selected.
We pointed out these 7 in particular because they already mirror what's in the council as to the city manager's authority in an emergency.
You cut out there for a second. Could you repeat that?
The 7 that we pointed out mirror the authority that is already explicitly listed in the code for the city manager in an emergency. So we wanted to clarify that the mayor also contains those specific powers. This is not an exhaustive list of everything that he or she could authorize in an emergency. But again, we just wanted to clarify that the mayor and the manager have the same power in this situation.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you. The only other comment I have, I do think it's important, although I understand sometimes it may not be possible. Mr. Mayor, if when you can, along with providing the council updates, if time and the situation allows, to give us individual council members at least an opportunity to provide input. I understand under the situation that's not always possible, but just simply request that when possible, you do provide us with that opportunity. So that's all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to make a comment at the end of this, but just so it's fresh in everyone's mind, as corporation, and this is to Councilmember Jensen's request. The other 5 or 6 times that we've declared an emergency, just since I've been the mayor, I don't think that there's ever been a time that I actually acted on anything outside of what we typically do, which this is a new ball game. I'm not saying it wouldn't, but publicly, I'm going to give the council the reassurance that if there was something drastic that we had to act on in between a council meeting, I promise you that every one of you will know about it, and I will ask for your advice before, to the extent that I can, before we make any big move. That's never happened before, and I pray that it doesn't happen again, but just to give you that assurance. Councilmember Kelly.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have some problems with this prospective ordinance. I'd like to perhaps start by paraphrasing what you had just said, that you would not, let's say, abuse these powers. This, and as Councilman Ruckriegel said, however, this is not about our current emergency. This ordinance is about all emergencies, the current one and any off in the future. And it does concern me that the City Council is pretty well left out of having any authority here. For instance, as I read it, and maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, once an emergency is proclaimed by a future mayor, you can keep proclaiming it and just keep going and keep going and keep going. The council has nothing to say about it, nor does the council have any ability to review and restrict or expand the powers given in this ordinance. Here we are in the middle of an unprecedented emergency, and yet we have been able to meet. We have been able to meet on time. Certainly it's a different type of meeting than we've had in the past. But it is important, I think, that we function, even in an emergency, as close to normal as we possibly can. And I think that given a little bit of time, various extraordinary powers that a mayor in the future may wish to exercise can, in a rather practical way, be approved by the council. I don't know why the elected council is really pretty well left out of this ordinance. And I would ask either for an amendment or that we defer approval of this. As a matter of fact, I will make that motion, that we defer approval of this until our next council meeting, because I believe that even though the state of Illinois may say it's okay and whatever, it's completely legal, I don't know that that's all that wise. We've had many cases in history of a leader abusing his power And if we're left out, that is, we, the city council, are left out of any of these decisions where we can practically be brought in for advice and consent, I think we're making an error that based on who the mayor is today or who the mayor was yesterday or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You can always get some sort of a not so hot person sitting in that chair. And I think we should protect ourselves and our future for this. So I would move to defer this for 2 weeks until our next meeting. And in the meantime, I think we all ought to talk about this a little bit and insert the city council into this ordinance. Thank you.
Is there a second for the motion for deferral? I'm going to ask again, just to make sure if all the council members online, make sure you're not on mute if there is a second for the motion. Okay, seconded by Councilmember Montalongo. We will go to discussion on the motion to defer. Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, I guess, for Corporation Counsel. If we defer, is there a problem with us deferring this?
You could defer it, but to be clear, as far as procedure goes, then the mayor could continue to authorize a local declaration of emergency every 7 days. That is one thing that you are not going to be allowed to change by local ordinance. That power is designated to the mayor and the mayor only by the state of Illinois. He is the only individual for the city, unless he is unable to serve at that moment, that can declare a local state of emergency under the act. So procedurally, every 7 days, regardless of the deferral, that could occur. Next, as far as any of those powers needing to be executed or authorized until this ordinance is considered again, it is possible, depending on the action, that we could certainly quote other sections of code from the municipal code, for example, the liquor stuff in particular. As the local liquor commissioner, the mayor could continue to exercise that authority. If we could not find a particular code section for the action taken, if you look at the existing authority for the city manager, he has not only all the powers listed here, but additional ones. The city manager, in the mayor's absence, in effect, could still take that action.
So nothing will change. It won't take away any of the powers that are that the mayor currently has under the Emergency Act right now, correct, then?
We would continue to operate under the existing code, which simply says the mayor can declare an emergency and has all the powers designated to him thereunder.
Sure. And I understand where Councilman's coming from with, I mean, normally we have a first reading, and right now we're going straight to this, and I think, and I for one, would like to see a change in here of when, as far as communication goes, that we, I'm not saying that we're, I would like for them to take action when they have to. I just want to be notified about when they're taking action of any expenditures, so that we're not, so that's something that happens immediately, and or for an option. I mean, we're a small enough community where we can assemble very quickly too, and have a meeting. I mean, now that we have even the electronic, if there was an emergency meeting that was needed, we could probably assemble within an hour, I would imagine now, with that. I just don't think we're going to bring this back again. This is the first time I've seen this come across the council's desk, and this is my third term I'm just guessing after today, this isn't coming back unless the rest of the council wants to see this come back. So I think it's probably wise for us to, if there's going to be some changes to this or addendums, that we get it done now and have it done by our next meeting. And if it's not going to take away any of the powers that the mayor needs or city manager, then I'm fine with deferring for one meeting.
Councilmember Reckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. While I can appreciate the fact that we could kick this down for 2 more weeks, when I'm looking at the rationales as to why this ought to be kicked down and considered for 2 more weeks, I find it interesting that I didn't get a call from Mr. Kelly beforehand telling me that he had some angst about this. But then I look at not every emergency is the same. And yet we are all assuming that any emergency that comes forward has the same capacities that we have in this one. Communication among all the council is not always quick. It is now. It is in this emergency, in a tornado, in an earthquake, in other situations. It may not be able to be quick. There are times when somebody needs to take the lead and to be able to act and quickly be able to make some of those what could be life and death situations. And what we're having here in front of us is not in order to put the mayor in charge of this. It is actually a clarification and putting us into line with what the municipal code says we should be. I would agree also with Councilmember Montalongo that communication is key. And I would hope for a conversation after this about how we would like to have further communication, because I don't think that, especially when we are talking about budgetary items, that we shouldn't be part of that dialogue. There may be some decisions that need to be made, but at least bring us into it. And we can talk about those. I think that goes into a bigger overall plan about how we communicate as a council. I'm not necessarily saying it has to be in this communication. This is an ordinance. And as soon as we communicate it, put communication in an ordinance, it's going to be outdated once we get into a couple of years down the line, and it will forget to be updated, just as this was forgotten to be updated over time. So for me, I'm not for a deferral at this point. I think I've had my questions answered. Council members around the horseshoe who've had some questions about it have reached out to me, have had multiple conversations on that. So for myself, I don't think there's anything to gain in those 2 weeks.
Councilmember Riggenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also spent some time talking with the city manager about this before the meeting, and I think we're in the middle of an emergency, folks, and the Illinois Municipal Code is pretty clear from what Corporation Council went through with us, what the ordinance needs to look like. I don't want to wait 2 weeks. Think where we were 2 weeks ago when we had Dr. Jackson and Monica Hendrickson here from the health department. Did any of us imagine we'd be at this point today? So this is an emergency that I don't think any of us have lived through in the past. So I appreciate the mayor's commitment to communicating with us. The city manager has done a great job getting us daily reports. For those that need more information, the health department has a daily press conference that the mayor is part of as well, and the county board chairman. So I think in light of that, this is something that needs to be done, and it needs to be done tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in chamber that hasn't spoken? Councilmember Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just got a couple questions. One for you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you very much for your pledge. But this is a very fluid situation. Tonight, as we speak, do you feel you have all the powers that needed to make a decision to keep the city running?
I do.
Okay. So my problem personally is the fact that I've not been born and raised in this country. I've never had a chance to study the Constitution. I'm not sure if it's legal or not, but when I look at the information in front of me, example, Mr. Manager, the Emergency Operations Center, okay, this is the chart that somebody put together. Nowhere on that chart I see my responsibility on there or the council's responsibility. So I can understand a little bit, since there's a lot of questions. I mean, I don't think anybody's questioning the mayor, but Mr. Malongo, Mr. Euler, Mr. Kelly, I mean, they're talking about where do we fit in? I think that's where it's not the mayor. We know where the mayor fits in, but I think a lot of us have questioned where do we fit in and how do we answer our constituent questions?
Well, in a state of emergency, under the National Incident Management System plan, with the incident command structure that we have, when we follow this, whether it's a flood, whether it's a blizzard, whether it's a tornado, or whether it's a pandemic, the role of the policymakers are to step aside and let the professionals that you hire, your police chief, your fire chief, your public works director, your city manager, step in and perform the responsibilities and roles, your communications professionals. All those people are there to execute on behalf of the city in that regard. This is the role that they're hired to play, is to execute during these times. Right now we're in a public health crisis. The incident commander is the public health administrator, working on behalf of both the city and the county. It happens to be that Monica Hendrickson has the requisite expertise and understanding to address those issues. That's why you want her leading the incident command, handling the operations, handling the planning functions. There is a role to play for the mayor and the county board chairman as the chief elected decision makers as part of the policy group. But it's specifically designed so that there are certain policy decisions that have to be made at that level, and then it works through the professionals to carry that out. But as our ordinance calls for today, any issues then have to come back to this board, particularly of finance, and we have to talk to you and present that back to you, and then you have to act on it. So your role of being the fiscal steward over the city and the caretaker over that is still there. It's just not immediately present when you're in an emergency.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too have spent time with the manager and the mayor and discussed this issue, and regardless of whether or not this amendment ordinance goes through tonight, it doesn't change the job that can be done tomorrow. So in my opinion, from what I've heard from Corporation Counsel, there is no emergent situation that requires us to pass this tonight. It's important enough to our citizens that we get it right, and so I do support a deferral. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Ali. This is a discussion on the motion for deferral.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Artis. I honestly don't see any gain by deferring this item. From my understanding, the emergency powers of the mayor don't necessarily change or don't change under this amendment. The amendment clarifies and provides more transparency in terms of what those powers are. I think that that's important. It's important to me. I think it's important to the public that we specifically know what those powers are, and this spells it out more clearly. So I don't know that, I don't see that deferring this will change the powers and give us more authority. I know that we all want and need to be involved in major decisions, that we want input and or notification, and I appreciate Mayor Artis offering that. I think in terms of the overall powers of the mayor during emergency, I think that that's something that we could revisit at a later time. I think it can come up again, Councilman Montelongo. I think that we can bring it up again if we need to discuss it more at length. But for now, I think that we just need to proceed and move forward with the clarity that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Graham.
We definitely need to proceed with this in a very affirmative way. Let us just imagine a situation where a large number of us became ill or died rather quickly, as has happened, for example, to some people in Italy, and we did not have a working majority of the council. Emergency powers are for times like this. If it wouldn't be for a pandemic, I don't know what it would be for. And it's not always practicable for us to be able to constitute or put together a special meeting of the council when we have a contagion that is ripping through the community, perhaps causing panic, etc. There are other situations too, which, if you look at all the emergency procedures that were in that very large booklet that should have been part of your orientation, you would find situations where radioactive materials are involved, a potential nuclear attack, etc. You have to give the chief, in this particular case, the city manager or the mayor, those emergency powers when it's not practicable to assemble the city council. And that's why everything happening as quickly as it's been happening, as Councilor Riggenbach pointed out, we need to be sure we provide this power, and it is revocable if necessary, but they need it when we have crises occurring very quickly and rapidly, which certainly has been the case with the pandemic and could be the case with perhaps a nuclear situation or an international showdown. So I think that it would be foolish to defer this.
Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Councilman Grab and others. I don't think it's necessary to defer this. I'm just going to reiterate what I said before. All we are doing by approving this ordinance is codifying the authority and the power that the mayor already has under the Illinois Emergency Management Act. So what we are doing is being transparent to the citizens of Peoria so they understand what that power is that the mayor already has under state law. I don't think there's a role for the council to be inserted in this type of power under the state law. And so for those reasons, I'm in favor of the ordinance, and I think that the situation warrants us voting on it tonight, rather than deferring it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Kelly, make sure you're not muted.
I was muted, even though perhaps some would like to have left it the way it was. But thank you. Mr. Mayor, I would be among the first to compliment you and to compliment our manager on the communication that we have had. I think that the emergency powers that you have exercised under the existing ordinance, you've done, as far as I know, quite properly, quite responsibly. I have no particular problem. And if the things keep going on the way they are, I don't know that anyone would be dissatisfied with the job that you and the manager are doing. My concern is that we're updating this ordinance, not so much for today, but forever. And I would like to have a discussion, I would like to have a discussion about inserting the council into this ordinance and to see if that is practical. There have always been rogue leaders of various groups who run roughshod especially when given extraordinary powers. Somehow you can never get the power back. It's things like that. We've not encountered that, and hopefully we will never encounter that. But this ordinance is not about today. This ordinance is about the future. And I think a worthwhile discussion about the City Council's responsibility in such an event is not only worthwhile, but responsible on our part. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I first would like to thank the city manager for responding so quickly to the question that came from a community leader, really asking and clarifying some of the very questions that have come up around the horseshoe tonight. As you indicated at that time, we are just bringing into line the roles that the mayor already has. Whether we defer this or not, it's not going to change the fact that the role that the mayor has currently is just being codified, as has been said, by this ordinance. This is not a council that forgets things, and I'm sure that if a policy session is necessary to bring more clarity to this issue at a time when it is more appropriate than when we're under the state of an emergency as we are today, I will be glad to be there. But for tonight, I think it is appropriate that we move forward in codifying into our ordinance the role that the mayor already plays, as indicated by Council Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Councilman Kelly and a second by Councilmember Montalanco to defer this to our next meeting. Our next scheduled meeting is April the 14th. Any further discussion on this item? If not, I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mayor Ardis,
No.
Councilmember Ali,
Nay.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Grab,
No.
Councilmember Jensen,
No.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
No.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Regenbach, and Councilmember Ruckriegel. There are 3 yeas and 8 nays.
So the motion does not pass. Just to remind everybody where we were before the motion to defer, we were on Councilmember Kelly. We still don't have a motion on the original item, but we're working our way through the members on the phone. So Councilman Kelly, I would still have the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am satisfied.
Okay. Thank you. And Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not have an additional comment. I'd like to move for approval.
We have a motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Riggenbach. Discussion on this motion. Council members in the room first, please. Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clearly communicate that certainly I'll be approving this. I had no problems with the powers. I just wanted to make sure that as soon as a emergency expenditure happens, that this council is immediately notified when that happens. That's the real piece that I was just looking for in that communication, and certainly was willing to entertain the thought of a deferral when we could come back if there was more things that other people wanted to see in there. But I just want to make sure that the city manager, and I guess you too, Mayor, if there's any expenditure made outside of our budget for emergency purposes, that this council is notified immediately. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Ruckriegel.
My comments are going to change a little bit, I think, on that. Here's the problem. We're seeing today on the national stage among great municipalities throughout this country when somebody is in charge and when somebody's not in charge about how interactions happen. At a time of emergency, and I do want to be communicated whenever we have expenditures that change, but to say that it has to happen immediately in the midst of an emergency, I don't think you can put that into writing. That's a policy that we should be able to have communication, but this is where we overthink it. We as a council elect somebody to represent us through these powers to be able to represent and make those decisions when nobody else can. Emergency powers are not to be taken lightly. They're not given lightly. And there's a trust that we've got to be able to play in there. But to be able to have somebody stopping making a decision to go on to the next decision, to be able to communicate immediately with us what an expenditure is, which we may not even know what that expenditure is. Because if somebody's having to acquire materials, safety positions, sometimes it's about the action that saves lives and deaths. It's not about letting us know the dollars and cents. How many times do we sit around this council and say, it's not about always the dollars and cents? Well, sometimes we have to figure that out. It's about public safety. It's about doing the right things for our citizens. It's about making the right choice at the right time. True leadership happens in times of emergencies. And hopefully, we won't have to use this at some time. But again, I think that we can micromanage this so well down that it can become very ineffective. And so I, for one, will be supporting it as is in front of us, which is in line with the Illinois Municipal Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councilman Graham always tell me that everybody around this horseshoe brings something different. My background's always been about being part of a team. Always been very successful when I was part of a team. And I think tonight, what's very important to me is the fact that our constituents are looking for, they want to be safe. They want to have good leaders in front of them. And I think it's very important right now to get behind the mayor and make sure he has all the powers that he needs to lead this city out of this crisis and this emergency. But Mr. Manager, I think there was a lot of comment around the phone and the horseshoe tonight. We need to get this back, I believe, on the agenda after it's all, we're past this crisis, and really be a little bit more proactive. So I will be supporting this ordinance because I do support the man and the mayor, and I know that he's been around a long time and he has the knowledge and experience to lead us out of this crisis. So I will be voting for this. Thank you.
Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard comment after comment about the necessity of doing this tonight. We've heard from the people that these powers are transferred to tell us that this does not have to happen tonight. The power stays the same tomorrow that exists today. Passing this ordinance change does not have to happen tonight. This is something that we have the opportunity to get right. I feel like I listened to some of the comments in the House of Representatives, pass the bill and fix it later, and that's essentially what we're doing here is when we talk about, well, let's just go ahead and pass it and then open it back up and clean it up later, is pass it now and fix it later. We don't need to pass this tonight. It does not affect the safety of our city. The mayor has the same power today, tomorrow that he had yesterday, and this doesn't change that. It's just the timing of opening this up. Thank you.
Councilmember Ali.
Aye.
We're still, thank you, we're still on, just if anybody has a comment on the motion.
I support the motion.
Thank you. Councilmember Graham.
Well, I think we've had a very healthy discussion about the power of, in this case, the mayor. We could have the same discussion about the power of the president, and we've been having those discussions in our country. So I think it was a healthy discussion, but on balance, I believe we're doing the right thing, especially in an emergency where you have a mass contagion. You may not be able to get the council together to make a decision. A lot of people fall sick. There are other things that could happen which would negate the ability of a working majority of the council to get together to make a decision. I alluded to that earlier. I think this is prudent. I think it's prudent not only tonight, but every night into the future. And Mr. Mayor, those are my comments. I will be voting in the affirmative.
Thank you, Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the motion. I've already made my comments for the reasons why, so I don't have anything further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Kelly. Councilman Kelly, be sure you're not muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not have any additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Moore and a second by Councilmember Riggenbach to approve. Seeing no further discussion, I'd like to ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Artis,
Aye.
Councilmember Ali,
Aye.
Councilmember Sear, Councilmember Grayeb,
Aye.
Councilmember Jensen, Councilmember Jensen, okay. Oh. We lost Councilmember Jensen. He advises that he doesn't think she'll be able to reconnect.
Is there a way to verify that? Madam Clerk, why don't we go through the, finish the roll call, and then we'll check with IT here.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo, Councilmember Moore,
Yes.
Councilmember Euler, Councilmember Riggenbach, and Councilmember Ruckriegel. So we only need Councilmember Jensen to vote.
Mr. Mayor, if we could, I mean, maybe what we can just do is call her and put her on speakerphone, if that would be all right with.
Somebody have her number.
I think
Council Peterson, I'm glad she didn't hear me say that.
Okay, Councilmember Jensen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and how do you vote?
Can you repeat the motion? I got disconnected.
Okay, the motion is to adopt the ordinance amending the emergency power of the mayor of the city of Peoria.
I vote yes.
Okay, it passes unanimously.
Thank you. IT has informed us that the way the electronic system works is everybody has to call in, and they group everybody together, and so we couldn't do it. We couldn't just have one person call back in. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
We are at unfinished business.
If it's pleased the council, I will try to use the same process in terms of comments on that. Is there any unfinished business with the council members present in chambers? Unfinished? Okay. I'm seeing no lights. Councilmember Ali?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Grayeb?
No, sir.
Councilmember Jensen?
Councilmember Jensen, do you have a comment?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kelly?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Moore?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Stacy Peterson, the city manager, George, who's running our video and technical system, and any of those who were responsible for getting all of this information relative to this COVID-19 on Channel 22 and running through our communication process. I find that the community is aware that that is happening, and the fact that we're able to also communicate what is happening from the City County Health Department. Oftentimes, a lot of folks are not connected to Facebook to see what is out there on the City County Health Department website. But thanks to that department, Monica Hendrickson and others have been on the radio in the minority community, along with the mayor and other city leaders, getting this information out as best we can to everybody in the community. So I want to thank them for that and ask that we provide the support, Mr. Manager, in making sure that the graphics that are on Channel 22 are large enough to be read. I know we're reusing some of the graphics that we use in other areas, but as you're aware, some of those things don't translate as well to television for people who are trying to see that information, especially as it relates to COVID-19 and all that we're trying to convey. So if we have the opportunity, I believe that's important also to make sure that folks can read what we have out there, especially today. So thank you all for everything that you guys have done from the staff level to make sure that we're communicating all we can to the community using that communication on Channel 22.
Thank you. Seeing no further unfinished business, Madam Clerk.
We would be at new business.
Any new business to come before the council members in the Horseshoe? Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. Question, I guess, is for City Manager. We've talked a lot about, and I think we've gotten some communication on expenses that have sort of been controlled. Obviously, we're not traveling. About the payroll expenses and about the laptops that were needed to be able to do work from home. And I think Councilmember Montalongo hits on something very important, which is the communication piece as we go through this, because this truly is unprecedented. Having spent the past couple of days talking to companies and banks on how they're foreseeing this future, there's a lot of forecasting going on. And while we don't know where the end of this is, we do know that there's going to be a financial impact into our budget. I know that some work is going on in here as well on that forecasting. And with a large portion of our revenues coming in from sales taxes, from having property taxes timely, from those various revenue sources, wondering if you can give us an update as to when we will start to see some of those forecasts, and realizing that any forecast just is that, it's forecast out, and we're not going to know fully where the end of this is until we really reach it. And I don't think it's maybe something that we have this week, but can you update us on to how that process will work?
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. Yes, I did send you all out an email this evening that just kind of outlined some of our concern over city finances. I mean, clearly, we're very concerned about the impact that seeing a lot of our economic-based revenues come to a screeching halt, and what that's going to have on our budget as a whole. In the email I sent you, Finance Director Scroggins just put together a quick snapshot for you of the general fund to point out that $75 million of the general fund revenues are economic-based. So sales tax, income tax, corporate income tax, our hotel, restaurant, and amusement tax revenues, all of that. $71 million of our expense in the general fund is related to staffing. So we are going to have a significant gap as we start to look at that overall. So the Finance Department is starting to do some projections. They're starting to look at that as we proceed. We will, at the next council meeting, have some preliminary estimates, preliminary projections, and that's all they are at this point in time, are preliminary. Some of the challenges, we don't know what's going to happen in Washington as far as an economic stimulus bill that might have any kind of set aside for states and local governments. We don't know what Springfield's going to do when they come back into session about addressing some of the issues that we face going forward. We don't know when locally things will get back as best they can to normal. So all of that's going to play a part. It's going to be a moving target for the time being, and we'll have to look at that as it comes forward. But I wanted to send out there was a good Brookings Institute article. We included that in the email as well, talking about the impact of this pandemic on state and local budgets. Everyone's in local government is obviously concerned about it, and many finance directors are probably not getting much sleep, because of that. So,
as a follow-up question to that as well, most companies right now are having to tap the brakes on projects that they would like to be doing or that they might see in the near future, in the next 30, 60, 90 days. And I know, again, travel, some of those you've discussed. Can we get a list of the things that we have included in the budget, which we may need to tap the brakes on? We can always pick it back up later on in the year if those projections don't fall through. But again, to be proactive for the taxpayer, we need to be cognizant of the fact that even with all due desire by some taxpayers, they may have a hard time being able to pay those tax bills on time. And there could be some cash flow issues there. So if you can get us a list of some of those things that we can tap the brakes on just a little bit to be able to minimize some of the other outside expenses on projects that we would love to see and that we have already budgeted.
Yep, we certainly can.
And then on the third question or third area that I'd like to see is, not that we are there yet, but I think we have to plan for what could be some action that we might need to take. Could we get a timeline and some information on the tax anticipation bonds process?
Well, we're not going to be able to issue tax anticipation warrants. We don't have, all of our property taxes go towards either roads or they go towards pensions. So they're not, it won't help the city as far as looking at tax anticipation warrants to bring in future cash for us. What we're going to have to look at is some sort of probably interim borrowing with one of our local banks in order to be able to do that. So those are some things that the finance department is starting to look at right now, is to say, okay, what can we do to extend some lines of credit with some of the banking institutions that we currently do business with.
Good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Councilmember Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to see that Councilman Ruckriegel brought up the budget again. I know we just got done talking about emergency part of it, and I don't think there was a concern for the budget part of it from him on that, but now he's asking about it. And those are the same concerns that I wanted to bring up here, too. Obviously, we shut down the city where we do the sales tax revenue from our restaurants and retailers is going to be very minimal. And I think some action plans need to happen very quickly. I'm glad to hear that the city manager is working on that. And thank you for bringing that up, Councilman Ruckriegel. I think as well, we need to be thinking about a recovery plan for our businesses right now. And I think we got to be that leadership from our economic development. I think it'd be very helpful. I wish we would have passed an ordinance where we would know the contacts for all our businesses here in town. That sure would have been very helpful. Maybe we can put that back on the agenda for our next meeting so that we can have addresses, emails, phone numbers to be able to contact our businesses. But I think there's some great programs that are out there right now for recovery. I did have a chance to talk with Congressman LaHood about the SBA, and I think it's maybe the Ways and Means Committee as well, but talking about loans for small businesses, and if for those who have to lay off employees, I think there's tax credits available as well. But I think we got to be that source of information. We got to be that leadership to help pick up and brush off our small businesses, medium businesses here, and let them know that we want to see them do well, and they can do it. And there's going to be a lot of new programs that are going to probably be coming out here. So we need to fully take advantage of that stimulus package, and we need to make sure that we're getting our fair share here in Peoria. And I'll be happy to forward the information that I have to our economic development, and happy, I guess it'll be an online meeting with them, and we'll kind of figure it out from there. But I think we need to be working on a recovery plan right now. I'm happy to know that we only have 5 cases in our community. I think that says a lot compared to some of the big cities across America. And I think there's a real chance for us to be able to get on that road for recovery much sooner than later. So with that, Mr. City Manager, I'd be happy to discuss more in depth about this with you and our economic development. Thank you.
Any other council members in chambers on new business? Seeing none. Councilmember Ali.
Thank you, Mayor Artis. I certainly agree with Councilman Monty Longo that we should begin to assemble a recovery plan. I know that we don't know all the details of a stimulus package, but I assume that there's going to be opportunities that will come our way, and we need to be in a position to be able to respond pretty fast and furiously, which may mean, redeploying staff in the different ways to be able to respond to those opportunities. So I think we will need a response plan and a recovery plan to help build our business and our economy back. I also support the business directory that never got finished. I think that we should make that a priority of establishing this directory that identifies all of our businesses and the contact information and demographic information as well. I do have a question, and this is under new business still. Finance Director Scroggins, I think requests may have come your way from a landlord's group with regard to non-owner occupied registration fees that are due April the 1st. I think there was a request to extend the due date, and I'd like to know what the status of that request is.
I'll hand that one off to the City Manager. Mr. Scroggins isn't present.
Councilwoman, the actual due date for rental registrations was March 1st. So those rental registrations that are now being requested to be paid later are actually in arrears. They're late. So in that regard, we did send a communication back to the Landlords Association saying that we were not going to extend the due date, that they were in fact due on March 1st.
Okay, thank you. I didn't realize that was a second request.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Gribb, new business?
Thank you, Mayor Artis. Manager Urick, tonight, what do we have in the piggy bank as far as our city reserves go?
Well, from a cash perspective, if we looked across all funds, which means you're looking at bond funds, you're looking at everything, we've probably got $40 million in cash, but not all of that can be accessed. I mean, I think when you're looking at the general fund where we're most liquid, or where we have the most flexibility to spend, that number is probably closer to $9 or $10 million is what we're currently sitting on.
Thank you, Manager, for your response. And there are many unknowables, but Peorians have been through a pandemic before. We're going through one now, and I think that many of the questions that are being asked tonight are altogether fitting. And as soon as this stimulus pack is actually passed, we of course want to be sure Peoria gets its fair share, and that our state does as well, as was referenced by some of the previous counselors. So right now, I guess we need to just follow the advice of the medical authorities and then see how things play out in the next week or two and go from there. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Jensen.
Councilmember Jensen? You need to unmute, please.
Thank you. Just in addition to the recap about the city finances that was contained in the city manager's update to the council this evening, just before the meeting, I asked that the city manager just quickly summarize a few of the other items that were in that report related to the Emergency Operations Center and putting together a housing plan.
Thank you, Councilwoman. In the email that I sent to the department heads and to the city council, I did talk about the fact that we do have an emergency operations center that's looking over a number of different things right now during this pandemic. It's a joint EOC with the county. It includes both the mayor, the city manager, the county administrator, and the county board chairman. We have coordinations through that policy group with the business community, through the Greater Peoria EDC, with our state legislators, with our school district and our regional office of education, with our hospital community, and also we have a long-term recovery component where we are looking at long-term recovery plans that's being tasked to Anthony Corso and Ross Black. There's a public information component that includes the city, the county, and a number of other entities that work in a joint information center. Stacy Peterson is coordinating our role there. The two emergency managers from both the city and the county, Jason Marks and Mike Vaughn, are coordinating with all of the other emergency management agencies in the state, as well as the Air National Guard and the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. Monica Hendrickson is the incident commander, is the head of the public health department, is also overseeing operations and planning. Public safety between our sheriff and our police chief and the fire chiefs that are outside of the city of Peoria and Fire Chief Artis. Infrastructure, which is led by our public works director and coordinating with our utilities. Human services, which includes the United Way, as well as the Center for the Central Illinois Agency on Aging, and as well as the mental health community. We're also working with the public health sphere as well, since this is a public health emergency. So all the hospital systems, our EMS systems are involved in that. From a housing side, that's one of the areas that we're working on right now, is trying to figure out what needs we have to put in place for housing. Specifically in that area, Kate Green from the Heart of Illinois United Way is leading that effort. And as we start to look at how we can work with the local hoteliers to find locations for people under three different types of housing needs. Those that are presumptive positive cases, where an individual is symptomatic and can't go home. Where an individual is asymptomatic, that means that they're not showing any symptoms and can't self-quarantine at home. And then for those people that may have a modified quarantine, where they may not be symptomatic, but there may be somebody in their household that is, and they don't want to go home. So we're looking at those three areas to try and find some housing where we can. In addition, staff internally is looking at how we enforce the governor's executive order during this period of time for essential businesses. We've come up with a process that was included in the email as well, using our community development department, our economic development department, our legal department, and our police department. So all of those departments are involved in those efforts. And then lastly, on the finance side, the mayor did send a email or a letter to all of our congressional delegation that was really trying to stress, as they take up the efforts of the stimulus package, that there's four key areas for the concern for city government. First, that if they establish a stabilization fund for states, that there's also some direct money that rolls down to local governments as well. Second, that right now in the first stimulus bill that they passed, they created an unfunded mandate for local governments. Imagine that. What they did when they expanded the Family Medical Leave Act is they included that private businesses can get tax credits for the amount of money that they're spending on paid family medical leave. But for cities, they did not allow us to have that tax credit. So we're asking that that be remedied in the bill. Third, some help in stabilizing the municipal bond market. I think it was, as we saw over the last week, the municipal bond market has been really dramatically affected as people were really looking at moving away from that market. And so we're really looking at how they can help to stabilize the municipal bond market. I know the Fed has been buying a lot of bonds to try and help that in that regard, but that's something that we're looking at. And then lastly, looking at a repeal of the state and local tax deduction, which was set at $10,000 in the 2017 Tax Cut Act, in order to help to encourage that state and local tax deduction, which helps everyone that is paying property taxes as well. So those were the 4 areas that the mayor included in his email. So that kind of summarizes where we are right now, and it will certainly change, and we'll continue to send emails out to the council on a daily basis, and the staff.
Councilmember Jensen, still your floor.
Unmute, please.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kelly, new business.
Not too much. I would just like to thank the city manager and the staff of the city, and you, Mr. Mayor, for your response to this emergency. I think you've all done an admirable job keeping us informed and also doing things beyond just communicating with us. So my thanks to you, and if you need any help, why, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore, new business.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As it relates to our business recovery plan that has been brought up by Councilman Montalongo, I'm sure when the time is appropriate and we start proceeding with these plans, just keep in mind that the Greater Peoria EDC, through Chris Setti's efforts, is the repository of a lot of economic development information that is impacting our community, not just Peoria, but our region. And he sends out an update on that daily. So if you're not getting that, perhaps you can contact him and be placed on that mail list. Also, Leanne Brown, who is the economic development person in Morton, is also sending out a daily recap or information that she receives as it relates to employment. We're talking about small business recovery. As we move and look at this recovery plan, I would ask that we have a special eye on minority small businesses, which are oftentimes very fragile, but are even more fragile today. In our consolidated plan that we just passed on page 98, it indicated that the unemployment rate for those 16 to 24 is 22.5%, and that was prior to this crisis. And I can imagine what that rate is now. Oftentimes, those who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale are oftentimes the first ones to lose their job. So if we already had a problem prior to this crisis, you can imagine that the problem of unemployment in some of our communities has been exacerbated beyond measure. And so as we're looking at this business recovery plan, let's also look at an employment recovery plan that has impacted those disproportionate folks in the African American Hispanic communities. So with that said, if at some point there is a virtual meeting that is pulled together, as I indicated, once it's appropriate, I don't think spending staff time to look at this today as far as any in-depth study would be appropriate because of everything that we are going through. But I'm sure we're not going to put that on the shelf. There will be some movement, and I'd like to be part of that movement to look at this recovery plan and employment recovery plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly, just on new business, I want to call out the work that has been done over literally years on the planning exercises for a situation like this. You know, we in the world we live in, we're constantly looking at planning and implementation of plans and so on. A lot of times they never have a good opportunity to have that plan go into action and work. And in this case, these emergency operation plans they're renewed every year. They're constantly tweaked. These people meet an incredible amount of time, and I just want to commend everyone that's involved with it. And if I went by name, I'd be here for a long time, but I'll call out the city county folks and Jason Marks and Mike Vaughn and Monica Hendrickson is the director over there. But it's unbelievable how much work went into that planning, but how 2.5 weeks ago or so when we first got together, how everything has fallen into place. They've had to make a lot of decisions that weren't necessarily part of that plan. But the communication across the board has just been phenomenal. I just want to tell folks, because I know a lot of folks are listening in tonight and probably some watching, that we are very fortunate to be in a community like this, to have the level of health care that we have, and the professionals that they're not looking at tomorrow. They're looking at 2 weeks, 3 weeks, months out of where we're going to be. I hope people don't get a little overconfident because we only have 5 confirmed cases right now, because folks, we're going to have a lot, and we know it's coming. So, but that's part of preparedness, and that's part of what our healthcare professionals are doing, is preparing the community for when that big hit comes, that they're not overwhelmed and don't have an opportunity not to take care of all those other people that are still having heart attacks and having a lot of those other drastic health issues. So we really need to continue to shelter in place. It's the world we live in. It's hard for us sometimes to focus on doing that for a long period of time, but this is going to take some time. And if we just persevere and get through this, I just want to send a message out, especially to the small business community. Every single person, or the 11 members that are elected that are directly accountable to you, have you at the very top of the list about are going to need the attention, you're going to need our focus, and we're going to do everything in our power to get you back up on your feet, and all those employees that are impacted by this, is to the extent that we can. And I know it's easy to say, but we've been having those conversations with our state and federal officials, and we know, everybody knows across the country how big small business is, and your recovery is very important. Finally, I would just thank our local state senators and representatives who have been on every morning conference call. They've been extremely available, getting a lot of information back up the chain to the governor's office before some of these executive orders were made. And we're very fortunate to have the 4 members who represent the Peoria area representing us, and I just want to thank them as well. So seeing no further new business, Madam Clerk.
We would be at citizens' opportunity to address the council.
Okay. So we've gotten a number of, as we had requested for the Open Meetings Act and for compliance with citizens' opportunity to address, we had asked the comments to be directed to the clerk's office. She will read those items by whoever sent them into the record at this time. There is still a 5-minute speaking limit, which hopefully will be okay on that as well. Madam Clerk.
First one, we have 12 altogether. So our first one is Renee Bolmer. I travel for work as a nurse from Peoria. Please don't shut the gas stations. My son is also a nurse who lives in Peoria and works in Washington. If you close the gas stations, he will not be able to get to work. My other son works at a grocery store and would be unable to get to work also. Gloria Wolf, I think we should shut everything down for everyone. Could be safe for our friends and family. And have a curfew. Things are crazy right now. Let him run it. Benjamin Watt, the mayor should not be given emergency powers when we do not have a genuine emergency. Preemptive strikes may be appropriate in war, but we are not in war. We are the best equipped country in the world to handle a healthcare crisis. We are the best equipped city in downstate Illinois to handle a healthcare crisis. If we can get overwhelmed, then tell us to stay in our houses, but we don't even give the mayor the authority to close liquor stores or cancel church or destroy jobs when people are murdered in Peoria over and over. Why are we even considering giving him that kind of authority due to the threat of an overrun healthcare system? We've been told that the goal is to save lives, but now governments are acting like the goal is to ensure no one gets infected. You've lost your focus. People will eventually get infected. You cannot control that anymore than you can control the weather. Destroying the economy by forcing us to live like prisoners may delay the inevitable. Why not set up tents outside our emergency rooms where people describe their symptoms in isolation before being permitted into the hospital? If they have coronavirus, send them home and proper treatment and instruction. If they are compromised in some other way, treat them in isolation. Use your power to provide help to the elderly who are being shut in. Outrageous things happen when outrageous measures are taken. They gave the mayor emergency powers in Champaign and gun sales were banned. Are they afraid someone will shoot COVID-19? Unbelievable. We are not a land of kings and dictators, even one who may think he knows best and is benevolent. We did not elect a mayor or city council to trounce on our constitutional right. Enough is enough. C.D. Cassidy, are you out of your minds? The next one is from D. White and K. Hicks. Hello, I'm a deaf EMT living in Peoria and work for Henry Ambulance in Henry, Illinois. Is it seriously all gas stations will be closed? How will I get to work and back home? Can you please reply to my email when you can? John Schick, as council members consider this motion to give the mayor emergency powers, please consider the old adage, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. History has shown that in times of crisis, the American people have often given themselves over to the mercy of their leaders and forfeited personal freedoms which were never returned. With freedom comes responsibility. Rather than giving additional powers to the mayor, please consider a different approach to urge with all seriousness the people of our city to act with care and work together as a community. Marcy Bigger, I would like to encourage everyone to take advantage of curbside services and delivery for groceries, medicine, and restaurant dining. If you must shop at a store, check to see if the store offers a scan as you shop feature that you can use on your phone through the app's store. I would like to see the city calling up neighbors who may not have online capabilities to help them place orders for curbside pickup and delivery. Together we can get through this, but it will take everyone to stop and think of a better and safer way of doing normal routines so that we can put this nightmare of a situation behind us. Matthew Searing, I would like to make it known that I disagree with granting emergency powers to the mayor. We as a city have done a great job of self-quarantining and essential shutting down non-essential business. The major employers in the area have people working from home. What else would be gained by granting these additional powers? At this time, I see no benefit to it, and we have no need to follow the precedents set by other cities and states. Thank you for hearing. Kurt Winders, this is a mistake. If an additional powers are needed, and there had better be a proven need, they are they are to be strictly temporary. The government serves at the People Swim, not the opposite. Lynette Barth is just a comment to Mayor Artis. I am a healthcare professional. Perhaps the city could reach out to the tattoo and nail establishments and ask if they consider donating their mask supplies. Donna D. I disagree with giving Mayor Artis emergency powers to impose and exert control as he sees fits over residents and businesses in the city of Peoria. Among the things I object to are his ability to impose a curfew, limit sales of gasoline and alcohol. Steve, Car Crazy, I am commenting in regards to the mayor getting emergency powers. At this time, the state is under a lockdown and only certain people are allowed to go places and limits on the number of people. This is a result of emergency powers given to one person. It's dangerous to give away the power of many and give to one. This also takes away proper representation of the council members and who they represent. Never should power be granted to just one individual, as it can create tyranny, as one can govern over all, and in a republic everyone should be heard. At this time, the public is not able to attend and able to give their opinion, whether for or against. That said, I think this subject should be given ample time for the public to be able to have their voices heard if they so choose. I think this should be moved to an appropriate time so the public can weigh in. Thank you. And Walid Mohammed, I think it's a good idea to close liquor stores because the only people they close late and make people leave their houses. And that's the final one.
Seeing no further citizens to address comments, Madam Clerk.
We have no executive session, so we would be at adjournment.
Okay. Please stay patient while we do a roll call on this one. We have a motion to adjourn, Councilman Sear, and seconded by Councilman Ruckriegel. Mayor Artis, aye. Councilmember Ali.
Aye.
Councilmember Sear.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Jensen.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Montalongo. Councilmember Moore.
Yes.
Councilmember Euler. Councilmember Riggenbach. Councilmember Ruckriegel. That motion passes unanimously. This meeting of the Peoria City Council is adjourned.
Gary's almost dead. I didn't see anything offensive. So we're good.
Apparently you got, my daughter's trying to make tacos. She